Today we are going to start our unit number 6. So unit number 6 is anti-friction bearings. We know that what is meant by bearing. Bearing is the machine element which supports moving part or machine components. So it permits relative motion between contact surface of the member while carrying the load. So where the bearing is used? Bearing is used as in our shaft chapter we have seen that the shaft are mounted with pulleys and gear, and these shaft or pulleys are used to transmit power. So these rotating element should be support somewhere to the rigid support. So there should not be any friction. So to avoid this friction, bearings are used. So bearings are the machine elements which avoids the friction between two machine elements which are in motion. Basically, there are two types of bearing. Bearing के दोन type है. Bearing के दो type है. One is sliding contact bearing, another is rolling contact bearing. In front of you, there is a first figure which is sliding contact bearing. Left side figure is the sliding contact bearing. In the sliding contact bearing, you will find that there is a moving element or shaft which is moving inside the fixed element. You will not find anything in between because there is a lubrication. Sliding contact bearing में क्या है? There is a moving element and fixed element. In between that, there is a lubrication. Nothing more than that. Whereas in rolling contact bearing, you'll find that moving element and fixed element are separated by balls or roller. So that is the basic difference between sliding contact bearing and rolling contact bearing. Rolling contact bearings are very common. We can see rolling contact bearing in everyday life. There are lot many examples. Okay, so let us go further. Now sliding contact or journal bearing. Sliding contact or journal bearing, what is the working principle and what are the types of sliding contact bearing? So you can find that there is a figure. In that figure, you'll find there is outer fixed part. So here there is a outer fixed part. This is the outer fixed part, and there is a rotating element. Okay, or it is also called as a journal. In the figure A, the journal is in the stationary position. वो घूम नहीं रहा है. घूम नहीं रहा है मतलब क्या है? Here you'll find that there is a surface to surface contact at the bottom. यहाँ पे जो है surface to surface contact है because it is in stationary position. When this journal or shaft will try to rotate, you can see there is a rotation. When it start to rotate होने के बाद क्या होता है? It will try to lift up. You can see now the journal is lifting up because of rotation. Rotation होने की वजह से it get lifted up, and after some period of time, after some period of speed, कुछ समय जाने के बाद, कुछ speed increase होने के बाद, you'll find the oil wedge. You'll find a oil wedge, or you'll find a here there is a film. There is a film in between this journal and the fixed element. You can see here there is a gap. This gap is called oil wedge. Oil wedge बनता है, but it requires sufficient speed. Speed रहेगा तो ही हमारा जर्नल ऊपर उठेगा. Again, if the speed get reduced, again the journal will be in the direct contact. जर्नल का और आउटर सरफेस का डायरेक्ट कांटेक्ट आएगा, and there is a more friction. So that's why this sliding contact bearing or journal bearing required sufficient amount of speed. Without speed, this kind of journal bearing cannot work. Okay, we are going to see about the applications also. Before that, you'll find there is a types of journal bearing. Now here depend upon the load. If the load is perpendicular to the shaft, you can see this first one is solid radial. Why it is called radial? Because the load is perpendicular to the shaft. When the load is perpendicular to the shaft, inside that you can see here there is a shaft. Okay, there is a shaft and there is a stationary bush. The shaft is rotating inside this bush. Okay, and there is a oil hole. The direction of load, is like this. The direction of load is perpendicular here. So this is the load W. The load W is radial in direction. Okay, so this is first kind of journal bearing. This kind of journal bearing you will find in our lathe machine. Very simple example we can say. There is a oil hole. You can put some oil inside that. The slider is sliding. In that such type of simple journal bearing is used. In our many other applications also, where the load is very huge, when the speed is high, this journal bearing can be used. Okay. Second type of bearing is footstep or pivot. So in that footstep or pivot bearing, you will find that the load is along the axis of shaft. The load is along the axis of shaft. You can see the direction of load. Okay, and there is a oil, and there is a at the bottom side also you'll find that oil. So this is the second type of bearing. This type of bearing supports a thrust load. Thrust means क्या? जो लोड जो है वो along the axis आ रहा है. Shaft vertical है. In the first there is a shaft is horizontal. Okay, so this is the difference. Now this is simple type of journal bearing. Actually हमारे syllabus में we are interested in anti-friction rolling or ball bearing. But still we must know this, what is the journal bearing or what are the types of journal bearing. That's why I included this slide. Okay. So this is simple working principle and types of journal. When we think about our radial or thrust ball bearing, because it is this slide is in our syllabus. Somebody may ask to draw the figure as well as enlist the different types of ball bearing. So first there is a ball bearing. As far as ball bearing is concerned, this is a simple uh, diagram of different kinds of ball bearing. You'll find that this red one, the red one is outer race. Here there is a red one is outer race. In all the cases, there is an inner race with the blue, and in between that there is a ball. Here the half portion is shown. This is the axis about which the ball is, the bearing is rotating. So this is the axis. Okay. So in that different types of ball bearings are possible. We'll see one by one what are those. First one is single row deep groove ball bearing. In the single row means only one row is there. Deep groove means outer and inner races. Outer and inner races are deeply engraved, and in between that ball is provided. So here this is the very common bearing which is used for light application, like our fan, simple small capacity motors. You'll find this type of single row deep groove ball bearing. Second thing is filling notch. In the single row deep groove ball bearing, The balls are provided by tilting the inner race and the outer. In this filling notch, filling notch type of bearing, you'll find that there is a notch and our balls are inserted through this notch. इसके अंदर बॉल कैसे डाले जाते हैं? ये notch से डाले जाते हैं. Okay, so this is filling notch type of bearing. The third one is angular contact bearing. So here there is a angular contact. So what is meant by angular contact? Here the outer race and inner race is having somewhat lesser and greater diameter. Okay, so you can find here there is a gap. So this gap and this gap is having offset. So angular contact is provided so that we can insert the ball easily. Now double row. This is single row, so this is double row. Two balls are there. Two balls are there. So in that two balls are provided which supports the load. Next one is self align. Self align. The name indicates this type of bearing. This type of bearing is used if there is a small offset. If there is a small offset, the self align bearing can be used. The next one is thrust bearing. So when the in the first five types, in the first five types, all these are the radial bearing. Radial bearing means the load is applied in vertical position and shaft is in the horizontal position. Thrust bearing, thrust bearing is one more type of bearing in which the load is here. If you just draw here the load is in our single row, deep groove ball bearing, the load is here. In this also the load is here. The load position is in the radial direction. In all this, the load position is in radial directions. So all these are the radial bearing because the shaft axis is here and the perpendicular to that there is a load. But in the thrust bearing, the shaft axis and the load axis are having same alignment. So that's why it is called thrust bearing. So these are the different types of ball bearings. Depend upon the application to application, how many number of balls are there, how many load is there. But main thing is that if these ball bearings are subjected to load in another direction because there is a load in radial direction also and axial direction also. In thrust bearing, the load is in axial direction. So all these five bearings cannot take much axial load. Why? Because here there is a ball and ball cannot take any axial direction load. Okay, that's why there is a one more type of bearing in our anti-friction bearing. These are called anti-friction bearing, and here there is a one more type of bearing which is called as a roller bearing. The roller bearing is used to take radial as well as thrust or axial load. You can see here in this roller bearing, again there are variety of roller bearing. There is a cylindrical roller bearing, there is a spherical roller bearing, there is a needle roller bearing, there is a taper roller. In all these roller bearing, the load can be a radial load like this and there is a axial load like this. Okay, so there is a radial load and there is a axial load can be possible. So this is the kind of bearing, this is the kind of bearing which is called roller bearing. Roller bearing having very simple cylindrical type of roller bearing. In the cylindrical type of roller bearing, perfect load direction is fixed. If the load is somewhat fluctuating, we must use spherical type of bearing. If there is a limitation in the space, then we must use needle bear. And if there is a more axial and heavy radial load tapered bearings are used. So these are the variety of cases. These are variety of types of roller bearing depend upon the application. Okay. So the application can be like this. For example, this cylindrical roller bearing can be useful for your differential, but for your our axle, back axle of automobile truck, the wheel of truck, that should have tapered roller bearing, because there is a chances that there is a uh, radial as well as thrust type of or axial type of loading is possible. So depend upon application to application, variety of roller design can be possible. So cylindrical, spherical, needle roller bearing, the needle itself, that means the diameter of the roller is very very small. जहाँ पे space कम है वहाँ पे needle roller bearing can be useful. Okay. So these are the types of ball bearing as well as roller bearing. Next to that, what are the advantages of roller bearing over the sliding contact bearing? This is the question which is generally asked in our exam. As we know, sliding contact bearing doesn't have any intermediate element. So directly journal is inserted inside the hole. Whereas in rolling contact bearing, there is a ball or roller. Okay. So what are the advantages of rolling means ball or roller bearing over the sliding contact bearing? First one is, in our ball bearing, small contact area is there because ball or roller is inserted. Ball means point contact or roller means line contact. So there is a lower frictional drag. In our ball bearing, less friction is there. So less friction means less power consumption. In our ball bearing, no restriction on the speed, can work at various speeds. Whereas in sliding contact bearing, as I told, it requires some amount of speed so that journal can lift up. In case of our ball bearing, less lubrication is required. In case of sliding contact bearing, we need large quantity of lubrication or constant supply of lubrication, otherwise the film cannot form. The rolling contact bearing is more reliable. It works 100% with reliability. It is less expensive because the mass production can be possible. So there is a very less contact. That's why heat generation is very less. Whereas in case of journal bearing, in case of sliding contact bearing, large amount of heat can be generated because of in some part of the moment there is a direct contact. So mounting of this ball bearing or roller bearing is very very easy. So these are the few advantages of the rolling contact bearing. But there are some disadvantages also. The disadvantages of rolling contact bearing are like, as it contains some ball and roller, these rolling contact bearings are noisy in operation. So noise is created. As the rolling contact bearing required balls or roller, inner race, outer race, initial cost is more. As there is a single element like ball or roller, it cannot take much heavy shocks cannot take by this rolling element. The roller always in compression or in release. So there is a uh, reversible loading on these balls or roller. So finite life is there because of fatigue failure. If there is a dirt or metal chip, if there is a dirt or metal chip inserted inside, maybe inserted inside this roller or ball, so it is directly damage the part. As we need a roller or ball bearing ball, so obviously diameter of the bearing will be as our simple uh, sliding contact bearing. So these are the disadvantages of rolling contact bearing over the sliding contact bearing. Okay, so let's talk about the application, because this is also one of the question which is asked in our exam. The application of rolling contact bearing. So as far as our deep groove ball bearing is concerned, it has application like electric motor or our fun pump, our fans. In that there is a deep groove ball bearing is used. As far as taper roller bearing is concerned, or the roller bearing is concerned, axle of the automobile or machine tool in our lathe or in our heavy planer machine, we can say that it requires both direction, radial load as well as axial load. So taper roller bearing is used. In case of our clutches of automobile or in our simple floor mill, or in case of roller mills, you will find that thrust load is important. So thrust load is important. That means thrust roller bearing is used. In our wherever there is a space constraint like differential of automobile or crank, needle roller bearing is used. For heavy turbines, generators like a hydraulic power plant or like our steam power plant, where huge amount of load has to be sustained. In that, our ball bearing or roller bearing cannot sustain such type of heavy load, where their journal bearing are important. So this is all about our first uh, roller bearing and ball bearing applications.